I want you to take a moment and think of the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. It's the classic story where one small act sets off a chain reaction, right? If the mouse gets a cookie, he'll want a glass of milk. If he gets milk, he'll need a straw, right? One action leads to another until you've gone full circle and you're back at cookies, right? It's the book that teaches kids the concept of an if-then narrative. Cause and effect. If you do this, that will happen. If you hit snooze 3 times, you're rushing out the door without coffee, like me this morning, right? If you plant tomatoes in May, you're eating salad in July. On a more serious note, if you think to send a quick text to check in on a friend, they'll feel remembered and valued. If you speak harshly because you're tired, then you may have to mend a misunderstanding later. Our Torah portion this week, Parshat Eikev, begins in a similar way, but with an if-then that feels like it has quite high stakes to it. The text says, if you obey the commandments, loving God and serving God with all your heart and soul, then I will grant the rain for your land in season, and continues with a list of blessings for obedience. But then the tone changes very quickly. It says, if you do not obey, then God's anger will flare up against you, shutting the skies, no rain, no produce, and the curses continue. In other words, obey and you will be blessed, turn away and you'll be cursed. It's not the only time in the Torah we have this, but this is one of the very clear moments. Well, this fits the style of an all-powerful God in Torah. I personally don't believe, and I imagine many of you might agree, in a God that works this way, in an omnipotent being who rewards or punishes in direct proportions to our actions, with immediate and visible consequences. Right? This direct cause and effect theology also troubled the ideological creators of Reform Judaism as well, which is why this passage that is actually supposed to be part of the Ve'ahavta prayer has been removed from our liturgy for many, many years now. But with all of this, we're left with a question. As these if-then statements with God are all about establishing the covenant, the way that we are in sacred relationship with God. If the covenant between us and God is described here as if we obey, blessing will follow, and if we don't, we'll be cursed, how do we think about reframing that covenant in a way that is true to a modern progressive theology? Thankfully, we're not the first ones to ask this question, and many before us have thought about it. We might take Abraham Joshua Heschel, who described the covenant not as humans trying to get God's attention for reward, but as a mutual relationship. Not if we do, God blesses, but because God calls, we'll respond. Or we might turn to the Reform Movement's 1999 Pittsburgh platform, which declares that we are called into covenant, a relationship of mutual consequence, binding each Jew to God and the Jewish people and all humanity. Right? This emphasizes that the covenant is not simply vertical, it's not just God and us, but it's also horizontal. It's us and others, with consequences that are not punishments from God, but the organic result of living in alignment with our values. One of my favorite teachings comes from an incredibly impactful professor that I learned from in Los Angeles while studying at Hebrew Union College, Rabbi Rachel Adler. And she teaches covenant as Brit Ahava, the covenant of love. Not in the romantic sense, but she writes in her book called Engendering Judaism, a Brit Ahava is the covenant that is entered into willingly out of love, not compulsion, with the purpose of mutual support and shared responsibility. Many of these are getting us to the teaching that we are not just in covenant with God, but that our tradition calls us to also be in covenant with one another. Rabbinic tradition elevates ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself, as a central principle of Torah. Rabbi Adler's teaching reminds us that loving our neighbor is quite possibly the clearest everyday expression of the covenant. The if here is remembering our shared humanity, and the then is a community that's rooted in trust and care and dignity. The first time I learned about this idea of a covenant is when my cabin at camp one summer made what we called a group brit, right? The Hebrew word for covenant, brit. It was a list of rules that we would ensure that our summer was filled with one that was based in mutual respect and trust. Such a simple place for a really important teaching. This could also be in the classroom at the beginning of the school year, right? It's a set of norms and rules in the workplace. Or what many of us might have on our walls at home, a ketubah. It's very much a covenant between a married couple. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Be in not just community, but covenant with your neighbors. Now, imagine a congregation, a city, a world where every one of us really took that covenant seriously, where we lived as if the well-being of God's world, our own souls, and each other's lives really depended on it. Because they do. And Parshat Ekev calls us into that vision. It's just up to us to make it real. We are, in just a matter of days, inching toward the month of Elul, the month before the High Holy Days. They are coming soon. Elul is our annual invitation to step back into covenant with intention, to repair what has been fractured, to renew what has been faded, and to recommit to living in relationship with God, with others, and even with ourselves. So again, if we return to that cause and effect, if-then idea we are presented with, maybe it can go like this. If we choose to live each day as if we are truly in covenant, then ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving our neighbor as ourself, can be a reality. And recommitting to a life of covenant with God and with one another is the pathway towards building the world we want to see. The covenant isn't intended to be locked up in that scroll, right? It's very much alive in us, in our community, in the ways that we interact with each other, the ways we greet each other, the ways we listen and forgive and celebrate with each other. So as we move into Shabbat, as we draw closer to the month of Elul and then eventually to the new year, may we all remember that, and may we choose again and again to love our neighbors as ourselves, to be in that covenant, and in doing so, may we find ourselves in our world overflowing with blessing. Shabbat Shalom.